Hello everyone, my name is Tetsuya, and I am from Japan. I am a Singapore lover and a frequent visitor to Singapore. If you are a Singaporean person, I think maybe you might also like Japan for tourism. So I hope we can be good friends with each other through my channel. In this channel, I will share a lot of my insights about Singapore from my Japanese perspectives. Sometimes I simply talk about what are impressive and interesting about Singapore, and often I will involve my comparison insights between Singapore and Japan to clearly explain the interesting differences between the two countries. Also, I will sometimes involve the comparison of Singapore and a few different countries. So, today's theme is Singapore is the best among all four countries in Southeast Asia. To make comparison fair, I will generally compare the capital cities of these three countries and Singapore. In this theme, I am going to make a few videos, and this is the first video in this theme. Today, I am going to share the four different points about what are the best in Singapore, in my personal opinion. Now, let's get started. The first point, not to mention, most Singaporean people can speak great English. This is a very important thing for foreigners who are not able to speak specific local languages of the country. In Singapore, there are three ethnicity languages spoken by Singaporean people. The first one is Chinese, the second one is Malay, and the third one is Tamil. Generally speaking, most foreigners are not able to speak any of these languages. That's why, if Singaporean people are not able to speak English, it will become really hard when the foreigners want to ask a way or ask some questions and receive explanations about something at shops or somewhere, etc. But thanks to the great English skills of Singaporean people, foreigners have no problem when communicating with Singaporean people. Oh, one really good thing I'd like to add is whenever I take Grab in Singapore, I always enjoy having a friendly and fun conversation with Singaporean Grab drivers. Thanks to their English skills, it is always nice to communicate with the local people, and it becomes possible during Grab rides because we share some time until we have reached the destination. As you know, the fact that most Singaporean people speak great English is a really amazing fact. As for the English skills of the local people in the other three cities in general, Kuala Lumpur, Bangkok, and Jakarta, though Kuala Lumpur is almost equally great as in Singapore, Bangkok and Jakarta are still similar to Tokyo, where most local people are not able to properly communicate in English. So, if I show the score of the point about English availability, including Japan, as a reference, the comparison chart becomes this way, in my opinion. So, next, I will compare public transportation of these four places in four countries. If you have been to all four countries, you will clearly understand how much Singapore is advanced out of these four countries in many aspects in general. When it comes to public transportation, out of four countries, Singapore is the only country where you can go to most places easily and seamlessly by public transportation. Of course, I don't mean because Singapore is a small country, you can go anywhere in Singapore by public transportation. The size of the country does not matter. Purely the public transportation system in Singapore is just great. So let me move on to the details. And I am going to mention both railway systems and buses of four countries. First, when it comes to the railway systems, both Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur are doing relatively a good job, and their railway systems are quite useful to move around a lot of tourist places. So, whenever I visit both Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur, I use their railway systems to move around the city. But compared to Singapore, there is room to improve such as by adding more lines to cover more areas so that more local people can use it for their commutation. When it comes to Jakarta, recently Jakarta certainly got an impressive improvement by completing the first and new MRT connected from the international airport. But still, out of these four countries, the railway system in Jakarta has a lot of room to improve because it is basically just the beginning of the whole project to construct MRT. All in all these three countries, people who live near from railway stations are certainly using it for their commutation. But in general, most people still drive to go to work, and it is constantly causing traffic jams and causing a lot of stress on local people every day. In Jakarta, in Indonesia, when I went to the city center from my friend's house, it was only about 10 kilometers, but it took about an hour by driving, 1 hour for just 10 kilometers by car. That Indonesian friend was constantly sucking his teeth whenever we were involved in the traffic jams and had to move really, really slowly. If railway systems are developed, this problem will certainly be solved. In Singapore, I guess the traffic jams would almost never happen because of their great MRT. Now, let me move on to the buses. When it comes to buses, out of four countries, I can make the most of buses only in Singapore. Or I would be able to say, I can use buses only in Singapore easily and smoothly. Talking about Bangkok and Jakarta, it is extremely difficult to use buses, or I don't feel like taking a bus in these places because the traffic jam is extreme. Often I don't know where I can take a bus because the buses don't arrive at bus stops. Buses are running with the door open, and it is dangerous when crowded inside. Or in case of this kind of small buses in Jakarta, it is also extremely hard or impossible to use without being accompanied by my Indonesian friends. Even if I want to ask some questions to the bus driver in either Bangkok or in Jakarta, the drivers are not able to understand English usually. That's why it is really hard to use buses. In case of Kuala Lumpur, the condition is much better if I use the direction of Google Map, but the buses don't come frequently like in Singapore. So, unless I am patient enough to wait for buses, buses in Kuala Lumpur are not a very good option to move around the city. Also, the bus ride in Kuala Lumpur is bumpy and noisy, so it is not comfortable. Compared to those three cities, the buses in Singapore are frequent, accurate, comfortable, cover a great deal of areas, and they allow me to go through the shortest way to my destinations, even when I need to take zigzag route in case I take MRT. So the buses in Singapore are extremely useful, and I can say they are much more useful than those in Japan as well. Even though the things in Singapore are generally very expensive, but the fares of public transportation in Singapore are really, really reasonable. So if I put the scores into the comparison charts, they become this way. So let me move on to the next best point about Singapore. So the next best point is related to traffic jams. I have already mentioned this a little bit in the previous point, but in Singapore, thanks to the great railway systems, talking about my own experience, I have never seen any traffic jams in Singapore. Of course, there might be some traffic jams in Singapore as well, but it would not be as frequent and a long time in a day as in the other three countries, because I have not noticed it through my eyes, at least so far. As for the situation of these three countries, when it comes to Bangkok and Jakarta, the traffic jams are really bad. It was faster to walk than to take a bus in Bangkok sometimes. Also, when it comes to Jakarta, I heard from one of my Indonesian friends that even VIP people in Indonesia use motorcycle taxis because they can reach destinations in time. My Indonesian friend was laughing at the fact that VIP don't necessarily ride Mercedes, etc., but take motorcycle taxis. I was also surprised about the fact, though I myself haven't witnessed it in my life. Well, now you can see a huge difference between Singapore and the other three countries' situations. But talking about Singapore's public transportations again, what I feel is great about Singapore is Singapore knows what makes people's life convenient. Singapore takes actions logically based on what they need for their society. Singapore doesn't hesitate to invest money for what are important for the society. And Singapore takes those actions really quickly. This is what is so impressive about Singapore. Though I am not sure when MRT actually began to be constructed and operated in Singapore. I believe the Singaporean government must have taken the construction of MRT as one of their top priorities after independence. Anyway, talking about the scores of this point, traffic jams. I mean, which country has a good traffic environment without many traffic jams? The score becomes this way, in my opinion. Singapore is definitely the best. Just in case, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia is not that bad, but still cannot beat Singapore. For this video, what I am going to mention from now is the last point about what is the best in Singapore. There are a lot more best things in Singapore out of these four countries. So, for the rest of the things, I will mention in the videos after this video. Okay then, the last best point in Singapore in this video I'm going to mention is the air quality. Out of these four countries, Singapore has a very, very best air quality. This point is associated with the previous point that there is the least traffic jams in Singapore. Traffic jams certainly cause air pollution badly, but thanks to a few traffic jams in Singapore, the air quality is kept really good in Singapore. Just in case, I am not saying few traffic jams is the only reason why the air is clean in Singapore, but still, it must be taking an important role certainly. As for the air quality, Kuala Lumpur is relatively better than Bangkok and Jakarta, but still far away from Singapore. So if I score these four countries, it becomes this way in my personal opinions. Now let me show you the summary. Talking about the summary of today's best things about Singapore, it becomes this way in scores. What do you think about your own judgment about the 4 points I mentioned today? Also, please don't forget to subscribe my channel to watch more future Singapore-related videos from my Japanese perspectives in my channel. Thank you and see you soon in other videos.